This video will show you how to use the Variable RX Zones tool to create a seeding recommendation in FS AIS. The Variable RX tool allows you to choose the data layers to include in a VR seeding rec and automatically creates the zones and rates based off of your input. The recommendation can use as many or as few data layers as you choose to include. So to get started, log into the FS AIS dashboard at dashboard.greenplan.com. Once logged in, click on the Field Manager tile, and this will open a new tab in your browser. In the Grower Farm field tree, browse to the field you're working with. At the top of the page, click the Spread Map tab, and then below, click on the Variable RX Zones tab. Now click and drag the field you're creating the recommendation for into the profile grid at the top of the page. The dataset portion of the screen is where you choose which inputs or data layers to potentially use in the recommendation. Once information is loaded here, you can define the parameters for each of them in the next section. You can use a current soil sampling data set, a single year yield data set, or normalized yield in the recommendation. Choosing to use a soil sample data set will allow you to use any data collected from soil sampling, like organic matter, CEC, pH, etc. By default, the Surgo or iSpade soil type data is loaded as well. Now we'll move down to the settings area. In the settings, you can choose the average, maximum, and minimum rates. The average rate is an important number because all of the weighting for the recommendation will use the average rate as the baseline for population adjustments. The max and minimum cutoff values are a safeguard to prevent over or under planting. For example, if we weight a data layer in a way that would call for 42,000 seeds per acre, the max cutoff would prevent the rate from exceeding 40,000 seeds per acre. The same rules apply for the minimum cutoff. In addition, just because the maximum rate is set to 40,000 and the minimum rate is set to 26,000 doesn't necessarily mean that the recommendation will call for those amounts of product. You'll also need to select a seed product, and you can enter the cost per unit for the seed here as well. This will show the total seed cost for the planting application on the PDF report. The cost per unit is an optional setting to use for the recommendation. The variable rate layers area is where you choose the specific data layers to use and apply weighting to them as needed. To use this, click Add Layer. You can click this again to add more layers. For the example, I'll use 3 data layers. I'll use the Surgo layer, my normalized yield that I created and saved, and I'll use the CEC value from the soil sampling data. Next, I'll choose how each layer will impact the rec by assigning a weight to each of them. The weighting must equal 100 in this column in order to create a recommendation. I'll weight the rec heavily on normalized yield at 80% and 10% on soil type and the other 10% on the CEC value. Now we can assign weighting and breakpoints to the individual data layers. You'll need to complete this setup in order to generate a recommendation. This is the area where the average seeding rate we selected comes into play as well. On the Surgo layer, I'll click the Edit button. A window pops up that shows the soil types contained in the field. Next, I'll sort the corn yield column from high to low. The corn APH values listed are outdated and may appear lower than the soil types actually yield today, but they're still relevant to each other. I'll start with the highest yielding soil type. By default, the weight column is 0, and in this window, a 0 is equal to the average rate that I selected earlier. If I change this number to 20, I'm telling the tool that I want the soil type to be 20% higher than the average rate I selected. For lower yielding soil types, I'm going to assign a weight of -20, meaning I want the zone to call for a seeding rate that is 20% less than the average rate that I selected. Once you've made the adjustments that you want in this box, click Save in the lower left of the window. Next, I'll do the same thing with the normalized yield layer. I'll assign the below average zones at -10%, the average at 0, which will call for the average rate that I chose earlier, and the above average areas at a positive 10%, or 10% higher than the average rate. If you're using soil sampling data, you'll need to define how many layers to use. You'll also need to define the breakpoint values as well as the weighting. On the CEC layer, I'm going to use 3 zones, and in the breakpoints 1 through 2 box, I'll enter 6. And in between 2 and 3, I'll use 9. As you enter data here, you can see the ranges in the area below. Now that I've defined the breakpoints, I need to go back and weight them. I will weight these the same way as in previous layers. Positive numbers are percentages above the average rate, and negative numbers are percentages below the average rate. Once we've completed this setup, we can use the buttons at the bottom of the screen. I can preview the application on the screen. I can print a PDF report of the application, or I can export the recommendation immediately or save the application to the grower tree. We highly recommend always clicking the Save Application button when you create a recommendation. In the event you want to change any of the settings, loading the rec and making adjustments is much faster than starting from scratch each time. I'll save this recommendation and show you how to make changes to it. Here's the original seeding recommendation that we just created in the grower tree. But let's say after discussing the rec with the grower, you decide to make a change to the recommendation. We can do this by right-clicking the seeding rec in the grower tree. VR seeding recs will have a red EZ icon. Once you've right-clicked the rec, choose Load Application. You'll be taken back to the screen where you originally created the rec. In this example, I want to completely remove the CEC data layer so that the rec only uses soil type and normalized yield. To do this, I'll check the box to the left of the data layer, and then I'll click Remove Selected. Now that I've done this, I need to make an adjustment to the weighting so that it equals 100% again. All of the other settings are already completed, so now I can preview or save the application again. When you click Save, you'll be asked if you want to overwrite the existing or save a new application. Choosing to save a new application will allow you to have multiple seeding scenarios saved to the grower tree that can be compared later, before it's exported to a controller file. The two recommendations that I created can be pulled up at any time in the grower farm field tree to export to controller file or to review and make changes.